this is where the idea for this paper and series of work began, really. Do you know what I stands for in IPCC? I. Intergovernmental is an intergovernmental panel, and government decides whether they will adopt the report that we scientists wrote. At that time, I was working as a coordinating lead author, and what happens during the plenary session is that we present line by line to all the government delegations in front of you, and they have to approve line by line. And when they have any objections or questions, we have to respond to that on the spot. There is no later, because there is a deadline, and if we pass the deadline, basically automatically the report is not adopted. Toward the end of the session, basically it runs around the clock. We work like a machine, and also right away we have to revise it until they approve. And it's consensus-based. So if there's one government delegation saying, no, I will never be able to accept this, well, then good luck. It would take up several hours, and even in the end, you may just have to kind of scratch it off. This is me and my colleagues there on the podium. We were presenting our own SPM, and we were responding to some of the delegation's objections to our SPM line item. And that's why these are all looking very serious, because, if we fail to address this issue right on the spot, then basically our SPM will not be approved and adopted. Fossil fuel is the main source of greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, fossil fuel, I think it was combustion of fossil fuel is the main source of greenhouse gas emissions. So I was thinking, okay, next one, because this is so obvious, so why should we even talk about this, right? And then there was an objection. Okay, what? Objection to this? Interesting. And then the delegation said to the effect that the science that supports your argument that fossil fuel combustion is the main source of greenhouse gas emission is weak and unfounded. Guess which delegation, which country does he represent? Saudi Arabia. Yes, he was from Saudi Arabia. Yeah. So I realized, wow, this delegation should be very motivated to say something like this, right? But actually, if you think about it, they are motivated. And their motivation is only one thing: to protect and represent the national interest of their country. That's their sole aim. That's why they are there. That's why they are paid to come there, right? So I realized that, wow, it's very different from what we are thinking. Yeah? So that was really my first realization. And the second thing was that the parties, when we say conference of parties, there was a Sharm el-Sheikh conference of parties, COP, COP27, right, last week ended. They mean nation state, right? The conference of parties, the intergovernmental panel that they represent is a nation state. So nation state, they are the building blocks that shapes international climate negotiation and international climate policy. So nation state is very important. And national interest is the main paradigm under which they are all operating. So this was, for me, it was the stark realization that the way that we are thinking, we meaning, I'm kind of generalizing, we meaning sustainability scientists and individual citizens who are concerned about sustainability, who are the we are the world people. You are most likely to be we are the world people. And you are probably not America first or my country first people. Right, but that's where the most of the conflict and misunderstanding in climate change negotiation and global climate change crisis that we are seeing is happening. So we are the world people. What do we mean by we are the world people? We are the world people. You're likely to be a utilitarian, and we believe that we need to do something for the greatest good for the greatest number of people. It can be not only just the people, but it can be greatest number of lives on Earth. And also it's not only about today, but it can be also for the future. So it's today's generation and also future generation and also other species. These are we are the world people. America first people, these are beholding national interest paradigm. What they believe in is that the greatest goods to me and my people, my countrymen. That's how they are operating. And Actually, this is the most powerful force that shapes today's economy and today's international politics. That's exactly the reason why Russian troops are in Ukraine today, right? And that's exactly the reason why COVID-19 vaccines were distributed amongst the most wealthiest nations first. And that's also the reason why our current president in the United States asked Saudi Arabia to pump more oil right after declaring that he would rejoin the Paris Agreement. All because of national interest. So we want to kind of at least understand and acknowledge that there are differences in paradigms. The result of these is a sign of failure. I see that the international climate change negotiation, the current model is not really working very well, and here are a few signs of that. The wealthiest countries in the world promised 12 years ago to create $100 billion of climate finance by 2020. It's not giveaway money, meaning that much of that is loan. So, you build $100 billion funds and you actually loan it for countries for climate transition, low carbon transition, and you get back with interest. But that failed. They couldn't come up with $100 billion over 12 years of period. Whereas, if you compare that number with the money needed for developing world to cope with climate change, it's estimated as $2 trillion a year until 2030. So $2 trillion a year you need, and over 12 years, we couldn't make $100 billion. At the same time, $16 trillion have been mobilized for COVID-19 among developed nations within 2 years. But one good news out of COP27 at Sharm was the New Deal to create what is called loss and damage fund, and this is actual text there. And obviously the details need to be really crafted, and of course there is also a danger that it will end up like the promise 12 years ago, but at least it's a good sign. But let's look at the kind of the actions that are being taken for that. So Ireland, Belgium, Denmark, and Austria have each pledged several $1 million for it. I mean, obviously, we appreciate that. Yeah, that's not nothing. Several $1 million is not nothing, but as compared to what is needed, it's really drop in the bucket. We are not really doing at the scale that is really needed at the global level. And that's exactly what Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, was talking about. We are on a highway to climate hell with our foot still on the accelerator. In a graph, it looks like this. So this is the trajectory of the greenhouse gas emissions of the past. It's the most kind of recent estimate that includes 2022. After a little bit of bump due to the COVID, we are back on here. Whereas the way that we should be headed to in order for us to go down to 1.5 degrees Celsius target or 2 degrees Celsius target is a steep decline, and we have shown no sign of bringing our emissions down. So as a scientist working in the area of climate change, I feel powerless. I feel like we are banging the alarm bell harder and harder over time, but basically there's no action to that. There's no response to that, except for some youth group. Not all of them I really endorse. For example, I don't know whether you have seen some eco-vandalism recently, like Just Stop Oil and Last Generation. Have you seen those news? Yeah, and I don't know whether this is really the best way to address climate change, to be honest. But the question that I was asking is, we are the world people or my country first people? What do you think? The main narrative that they are saying is that, well, they are the greatest victim of climate change. The future generation is the greatest victim of climate change, meaning that I'm losing money. I'm losing losing my livelihood. Therefore, you should stop it. So, I'm acting on my own interest. It could be interpreted as such, right? Our study, what we have done, was actually fairly simple. So we first wanted to look at the overall benefits and costs of climate change and its mitigation at a global scale. And then we wanted to look at the country-level GDP estimates until 2100 on the business-as-usual scenario and 2 degrees Celsius scenario. And then map that GDP to life expectancy estimates by country by age cohort by the United Nations. And then estimate cumulative average lifetime GDP per capita by country by age cohort. So what that means is that under climate change, what would be the expected cumulative lifelong GDP per capita by country, by age cohort, based on your birth year. And under climate change mitigation scenario, how does that change? I will go very briefly on the methods. So method is not very complicated. We have used the literature for most of the estimates. So the first one is cost of mitigation. There can be a lot of different costs related to mitigation. We try to use the most tangible ones, one of which was the stranded fossil hydrocarbon asset under the 2 degrees Celsius scenario. So under 2 degrees Celsius scenario, we have finite amount of carbon budget, right? And that means that beyond the carbon budget, we may not be able to excavate the hydrocarbon from the ground. So they are stranded. And that means that the opportunity cost, well, they can excavate it and sell it at the market price, is lost. So it's a bygone opportunity cost. So fortunately, we do have nice publication by McLeod and Atkins in 2015 that shows marginal cost of producing oil and natural gas, and we were able to map it with the carbon budget so that we know which country will not be able to excavate their hydrocarbon assets, so strand their fossil fuel resources. And another cost of mitigation is the additional investment for low carbon energy transition. There are a lot of different estimates by different IM integrated assessment models. So we use some of the representative ones from the literature there. Now, what about the benefits of mitigation? And when climate change is mitigated, then there can be a lot of different benefits. Yeah, so the severe weather events may be reduced, crop yield may not go down as much, for example, and there can be some lives to be saved. Unfortunately, there hasn't been much literature really developed in that area that can really quantify and monetize the amount of savings or benefits of climate change mitigation by country level. So we couldn't actually look into those physical damages by climate change. But what we could do was to look at the Berkey et al. That is called damage function. There is optimal temperature, and if the temperature goes hotter than that, then there's a nonlinear decline in the productivity, labor productivity. Therefore, your GDP goes down quicker. So as you can see here, for some of the colder countries, actually a little hotter would be better for your GDP, but some countries, in hotter countries, actually a little more, additional temperature will dramatically bring down their GDP. So it's based on statistical analysis, and they estimated that by 2100, as much as 23% of global income may be lost if climate change is unabated. As I said, there's a caveat because what we could not include was the physical damages of climate change due to, for example, sea level rise and mortality. And this was a very recent study, so we already submitted a long time ago. We could have utilized this better if we have known this, but unfortunately at the time we didn't have this. And they estimated $185 per ton of CO2 equivalency. And our number was roughly about $266 per ton of social cost of carbon. So it's larger than that, but probably adding this will change some of our results. So let's go straight into the result. So this is the global total cost and benefit picture based on the line items that we have included. As I said, this is not complete, so physical damages were not included. But general story goes that the benefits of climate change mitigation substantially outweighs its cost. So at a global level, climate change mitigation makes sense. So this is cost of mitigation. What you are seeing is that Russia, US, China, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, those are the countries that incur the biggest cost due to the stranded asset. And the one in Latin America, I believe that that's Venezuela. So the world's largest oil reserve country. Okay, so that's the cost of climate change mitigation due to the stranded asset cost. And this is benefits. India seems to be the greatest beneficiary from climate change mitigation. It means that climate change actually has a disproportionately harsh effect to India. Look at Africa. So almost the entire continent is blue. So they are benefiting a lot from climate change mitigation. But look at the big country top right. Russia is losing money from climate change mitigation because they want their country to be a bit warmer. Agricultural productivity increase, labor productivity increase. So many good things may happen under climate change. So think about this. If you're Russian, in order for Russia to mitigate climate change, you have to incur a lot of cost because you have a lot of natural gas reserve, you have to strand it, right? And then at the same time, the result of it is that you're losing money too. So this is a net benefit. So basically, benefit minus the cost. The bluer color shows benefits, net benefits, and the redder color or yellow color shows net cost. A message from here is that low-income countries are generally the beneficiaries. And many of the high-income countries are losing money until 2050. So this is the picture until 2050. So in the short run, many of the developed countries are not very sanguine about the climate change mitigation. They are not really jumping into the bandwagon. So this is the kind of summary of this in terms of the income group. So high-income countries, they have higher costs than benefits. Upper mid-income, the same. Only low middle-income countries have higher benefits than the cost amongst the ones that we have considered. And low income is almost invisible, but you have a higher benefits than cost. But that is only until 2050. But if you look at 2100, the picture looks differently. So all countries, all income groups will benefit from climate change mitigation. So it makes sense for everyone, all the countries, to mitigate climate change if we really expand our time horizon. That also means that the generation who will live later this century will have more benefits during their life, right? So that leads us to the age cohort. So this is the global average. So these are all birth years, which year that you're born, you think about where you belong to. And then the red bar shows the cost based on our assumptions, obviously. And then the blue bar shows the benefit. And the break-even point occurs in 1991. Globally, on average, if you are born prior to 1991, you are incurring cost out of climate change mitigation. But if you are born after 1991, then you are gaining out of climate change mitigation. But that also means that over time, the population that are gaining on average from climate change mitigation dominates the total population pool. So by 2060, most of the population will be the gainers. But there is a spatial distribution. So that is global average. So this is spatial distribution. So this is a percentage of population born after the break-even generation now. So you see that most of the countries in African continent and Latin America and India and Southeastern Asian countries, they are already almost like 75% or more of the current population were born after the break-even generation already. Yeah? Whereas Russia, China, Mongolia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, most of the European countries and Canada, less than 25%. Some summary of findings of climate change and its mitigation create uneven cost-benefit landscape across space and time, and this is very evident. And according to our limited results, climate change mitigation is expected to cost high-income countries in the short run until 2050, but benefit low-income countries in both short and long run, and benefit the generation born after 1991 on average at a global scale. But for US, Russia, China, and Northern Europe, the break-even generation is yet to be born. Yeah? So these are the powerful countries, economically and politically, globally, they are very powerful countries, but break-even generation is yet to be born. So what are the implications? What kind of story that I'm taking out of this? So under all the limitations that I mentioned about this study, our study calls the effectiveness of the current model for international climate negotiation into question. The reason is that it is working through the nation state as the parties. So nation states has to decide what to do internationally and collectively. And nation state has been working under the paradigm of national interest. And this is exactly, in my opinion, why we are in the gridlock. Although we know that there's a greater benefits of climate change for the future generation, all that, but no, I don't want to lose my own interest. My country is important. Not global benefits. No, I'm sorry, but I have to care about my own country's benefits first. Climate change mitigation is not appealing to the decision-maker generations of key global economic and political powerhouses today. That include Russia, US, Canada, European countries, all these. They may sound like they are the protectors of the environment and that, the warriors of climate change mitigation, but look at what they are doing. Look at their actions. Actually, their actions are very meager toward climate change. And probably there is a reason for that. But also at the same time, we found that climate activism in Europe, especially Northern Europe, cannot be really explained by this financial interest narrative. Yeah, we cannot explain everything using this simple analysis, obviously. So now I would like to ask you to close your eyes. Imagine that you are in the IPCC plenary room. But this time, you are not as a scientist. You're there not as a scientist, but you are a part of the delegation representing the interest of your country, which happens to be Saudi Arabia. And you know that climate change mitigation will greatly and perhaps permanently damage your economy and the well-being of your people, your countrymen. Then let me ask you a question. Would you agree to take a bold action to mitigate climate change? Now you can open your eyes. How many of you would? Yeah, I think that's the problem. That's the problem that we are facing now. So here's an unthinkable question. Shouldn't we consider compensating the nations and generations for the opportunity cost from climate change mitigation? So taking it simply, shouldn't we pay Saudi Arabia for not exploiting their oil reserve in the future? What do you think? What's the difference between, for example, paying Brazil for not developing their rainforest? The difference is the historical baggage, which is very difficult problem to solve. I want to talk about that too. Because we see Saudi Arabia, Russia, United States, China as the perpetrator of climate change. And they are the ones who are responsible for climate change. Therefore, they have to pay for climate change damages and losses, right? And it's unthinkable for us to give money to them, right? But that's exactly the reason why we are not seeing global actions. In other words, given that the pie grows bigger under climate change mitigation, can part of the surplus under climate change mitigation allocated to those who would lose so that we can mobilize climate actions quickly? Under such a structure, we are the world and my country first paradigms can be aligned. So basically there's no difference because, it will benefit me and my country, but at the same time, the rest of the world. So that's the best, I think. So we are the world paradigm and my country first paradigm. If they are aligned, then we can really unleash the power of the international actions. And currently that is exactly what is lacking, I think. Why this is so difficult problem to solve? Because of the historical baggage. Historical baggage is a very difficult problem to solve. But if we really think about the future, how can we resolve all these complexities and conflict? We cannot really dwell on the history, I think. We should really think about the future and everybody on it. So with that, I would like to propose we sing together, okay? Can we sing? We are the world, okay? We are the world. We are the children. We are the ones make a brighter day, so let's start reducing. There's no choice we're making. We're saving our own life. It's to make a better day, just you and me. Again! We are the world. We are the children. We are the ones make a brighter day, so let's start reducing. There's a choice we're making. We're saving our own life. It's true, we'll make a better day, just you and me. Woo! Thank you. Okay, with that, I would like to thank all the EPS members at ETH Zurich and my friend and colleague, Andre, and Susan Luis for their hospitality and camaraderie, and also to Haozhe Yang, who really do most of the work that I presented to you. Thank you.